Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with cultured cashew cream cheese. That's right, Chef John's making a vegan cheese spread. I know, I can't believe it either. I also can't believe how good this came out, since it was my first try at plant-based cheese. And yes, as you can see, it passed the bagel test. So with that, let's go ahead and get started by transferring some raw cashews into some nice cold fresh water, since the first step to this process is soaking our nuts until they're nice and soft. Right, they say the minimum is like 4 to 6 hours, but most people suggest soaking them overnight. And in the spirit of full disclosure, I actually went for 24 hours, at which point my cashews looked like this, and they were fully hydrated and beautifully plumped. And once we have soaked those, we will drain those very well, and then we'll transfer those into our blender. And as I said, these need to be raw cashews, right? Not toasted, not roasted, and certainly not salted. And once those have been transferred in, we'll go ahead and add the rest of the ingredients, starting with a touch of salt. Okay, something pure, like kosher salt or sea salt. And then I also tossed in a spoon of nutritional yeast, which is that stuff the hippies put on their popcorn. And while optional, that does help give this a cheesier flavor. And then we'll also add a little bit of apple cider vinegar, followed by the last and most important ingredient, besides the cashews. And that would be some plain, probiotic, active culture yogurt. And because I wanted to keep things vegan, I went with a cashew yogurt, but I don't see why any active culture yogurt wouldn't work. And then last but not least, we'll add a small splash of cold fresh water, just to help all this blend up nice and smooth, which is the next step. Oh, and I should mention, everything in this is easy to find at the store. Right, you might have to check in a few spots you've never looked before, but it's there. And yes, it does help to have a really nice blender for this. Although if you don't, it still will work. It just might not be quite as smooth. And after blending that on high for a minute or two, and as I mentioned, getting this as smooth as possible, we'll go ahead and transfer this into whatever kind of container we're going to ferment this in. And for me, the most logical choice would be glass. Which reminds me, the legal department wants me to make sure you understand everything used in this recipe should be sterilized with either hot water or a sanitizing solution. So if you're not sure what that means, do a search. And of course, we will also cover that in the written recipe. But anyway, once that's been transferred in, and we've given it the old shake-a-shake-a to settle everything down, we will cover that, and then simply let it ferment until it's as tangy as we want, which I'm going to do wrapped in a few towels, on top of a heating pad set on low, which kept things at about 90 degrees. But if you don't have one, a lot of people just let it sit on the counter at room temp for like 24 to 48 hours. And even though it's going to take longer, the same process will occur. All right, those microorganisms in the yogurt, and also, by the way, in the cider vinegar, ferment the mixture, increasing the acidity, except here, instead of using cream from a cow, we're using cashew cream. But the fermentation process is basically the same. But anyway, I let mine sit overnight, and then part of the next morning, and I did check it and stir it a few times. And again, what we're checking for is the level of tanginess and the intensity of that fermented flavor, which right here, after a couple tastes, I decided was right where I wanted it. Okay, we'll get into the flavor later, but it was definitely a little bit cheesy and significantly tangier than when we started. But I thought it definitely needed some salt. So I went ahead and added a couple nice big pinches and stirred that in and gave it another taste. And by the way, that's one of the challenges here. It's hard to taste things at room temp when you're going to serve them cold. But despite that, I could tell it was a little bland, and the extra salt definitely helped. And then I could have just chilled this and served it, but I decided to transfer it into a smaller container and then pop it in the fridge so I could let it mature and age for at least a day, since I hear that helps the flavors develop. And also I was hoping the texture would get a little bit firmer, so that's exactly what I did. And yes, I used a container that has one of these locking lids, you know, in case anyone breaks into my fridge. But anyway, I popped that in the fridge and then pulled it out 36 hours later to give it the official cracker taste test. And while unfortunately the texture didn't get any firmer, I believe the flavor got even better. Although again, that could just be from eating it cold. But anyway, it was wonderfully creamy, and very tasty. Although, to be honest, this did remind me more of creme fraiche than cream cheese, which is definitely not a bad thing. And even though I said it was optional, I think the nutritional yeast here is important. Right? The reason people do put this on popcorn is because it sort of kind of has a Parmesan-like flavor. So if you can find it, which you can, I highly recommend adding it. Oh, and speaking of adding things, once we get to this point, we can add anything into this we want. Right? Things like garlic and herbs and spices. So please customize as you see fit. I mean, you are, after all, the vegan of making cheese like a vegan. And pretty much anything we'd add to a regular fresh cheese would work beautifully here. But anyway, to summarize, I was very happy with the results, and it was great on crackers. But I had to make sure it would work on a bagel, which I topped with some plant-based smoked salmon that I made the day before. Oh yeah, that's what vegans and us vegan curious people call thinly sliced carrots that have been smoked and marinated. And when you add that to the top of our cultured cashew cream cheese, along with all the traditional garnishes, you are not eating something that tastes exactly like bagel with cream cheese and lox. But this is quite delicious in its own right. And like I said, while not exactly the same, it will kind of scratch the same itch. And again, you heard my disclaimer earlier that this is the first time I've tried this. And next time I might try a little bit less water to maybe end up with a little firmer texture. But other than that, I was extremely happy with how this came out. In fact, the next time I run into a vegan at a party, I'm going to tell them about this. And if you're wondering, how will you know which people at the party are vegans? Well, that's easy. They will tell you. It never doesn't come up in conversation. But anyway, whether you're a vegan or not, I thought this was fun, interesting, and easy to make. And I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.